announce my guest, Mr. Arthur Becker. Mr. Becker is the project officer at the EPA. Mr. Becker, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Sorbor, for this invitation.
Okay. And also we have Mr. John Cannon. Mr. Cannon is the coordinator of the NDC, what we're about to talk about. That's the nationally determined contribution. Mr. Cannon, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. George, for inviting us here today.
Okay. Now, so Mr. Connor, you are the best person. We don't want to be, foolhardy here to pretend as if, we know basically about this whole NDC. Just give us a bit of history. How did it all start and what's the NDC?
Yeah, thank you very much. So, firstly, we want to say thanks to ERBC family for inviting us to talk about our NDC. And then the big program that will be happening today at the Painesville Town Hall is like we are going back to where it all started.
Okay.
So the first thing before we start to talk about the NDC as our action, we know that globally climate change is happening and it is real, and no one can deny today that climate change is not happening. In Liberia, we can see the visibility of climate change. If you go to West Point, you go to Town, you go to Greenville, if you go to Grand Bassa, you will see the impacts of climate change. And even those people who are involved with agriculture, you will see that climate change is also impacting their activity. So the NDC came about because of climate change, and it's a document produced to outline our own climate ambition and then our climate action in general, talking about what we intend to do to reduce what is happening in terms of climate change, like greenhouse gas emission to the atmosphere, and then to also adapt how our country will be able to adapt to climate change. So there are sectors that are sensitive to climate change.
Okay.
So if you look at our NDC, it cut across 9 sectors, and then you have agriculture, which play a major role when it comes to our national economy.
Now, why did you coin it as the nationally determined contribution?
Yes, it's not me that coined it actually.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have the UN that is responsible for global issues. So there's a body responsible for this, and they call them the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change.
Okay.
And so this actually started with an I. So it was once called the intended nationally determined contribution. That is to say, what the country intend to do
Okay.
in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emission, and in terms of how the country could be able to adapt to climate change. But then later on, because of ownership, national ownership, it now became termed as a nationally determined contribution. So that country can take ownership of what their own climate action on what they want to do, and then raise their ambition to whatever level they want to do with the support of the international community, and then with their looking down into their own national budget to support the NDC implementation.
Okay, so we'll talk about the implementation, but you continue to mention reducing greenhouse gas emission. I want for people to understand you, basically. What do you mean?
Yeah, so the way we do farming, for example, in Liberia, we do bush fallow, shifting cultivation. So this year you'll notice that a farmer will go and cut down huge forest, partial forest, just to make few bounds of rice, and the next year the farmer will leave that particular spot and go to another place. And the way we do the farming as well, we also burn. So as you burn, the smoke leaving that particular site to go into the atmosphere is what we call CO2.
Okay.
Yeah, carbon dioxide. So the carbon dioxide, they accumulate into the atmosphere, and then they cause this problem of reducing the blanket level of the atmosphere, because we have there's a if you look into the atmosphere, there's a blanket. It's like a blanket that is trying to reduce the rate of the sun to the earth. So as we emit more sunlight, what happens? You have more gases into the air, and then that will now reduce, the ozone layer. We call it the ozone layer, and then sunlight will be emitted directly to the earth, and then it brings about global warming. And if you look into the Arctic region, for example, where you have ice, the ice are melting today. and now we are faced with the issue of sea level rise, and then the issue of drought and what have you in some part of the world.
Okay. Now let's hear from Mr. Baker. Mr. Baker, this whole implementation plan of the nationally determined contribution. Our people listening. Let's take for instance our rural listeners, and maybe some in urban areas as well, don't really may not understand basically how does it affect their lives, how does it impact them. This whole program that you be holding today, implementing the national determined contribution, how does it affect our people? How does it impact their lives?
Thank you so much, Sorbor. In 2021, precisely in August, we actually began this process a year and concluded with the submission of the nationally determined contributions. In essence, the nationally determined contributions is the climate change action plan of the country.
Okay.
When we initiated the first 5-year climate action plan of the country between 2015 to 2020, we did not have a clear-cut implementation plan. What the implementation plan basically seeks to do is to roll out measures and targets that we've set out along all of the sectors that we've identified as priority sectors.
Okay. The 9 sectors.
The 9 sectors. In 2015, we had 5 sectors, precisely energy, waste, and transport, which are cardinal to Liberia, and as well as agriculture and forestry. When we came to the drawing board to revise the nationally determined contributions for the next 5 years, that we now have an implementation plan for, we took into consideration the emerging national circumstances of the country, which took into consideration health as a priority issue. We all know the emergence of Ebola in Liberia, the emergence of COVID, and its impact on the people globally and also particularly in Liberia. We took into consideration the fisheries sector, which is a vital economic sector to the country. We also took into consideration industry, which is impacting greenhouse gas emission levels. So the implementation plan basically takes into consideration how do we intend to meet those targets that we've outlined across those 9 sectors.
Okay.
And also placing cost to how do we intend to meet those targets. And the nationally determined contributions or the climate change action plan of the country is costed at 490 million. That is the cost.
490 million.
490 million. Along those perimeters, those 9 sectors that we have outlined. But the cost is both conditional and unconditional.
What do you mean?
Conditional in the sense and unconditional that, conditional in the sense that we depend on donor funding, financial resources externally to be able to meet up with those targets that we have outlined. And unconditionally, the government of Liberia by itself will also place in the national budget allocations to be able to carry out most of what we've stated in the implementation plan. So the implementation plan articulates cost, interventions, cost, sectorial focus, and as well as the how we intend to drive the process towards its logical conclusion.
Okay, let me just come in. When you said initially when the plan was carved, you had 5 areas that you were looking at.
Yes.
Did you make any sort of interventions before reversing the plan?
To be honest, in 2015, like many countries who also submitted their NDCs, because in 2015, the Paris Agreement was signed, and including Liberia, we all hastily, to a large extent, developed our nationally determined contributions, not taking into consideration a lot of priority focus areas.
Okay.
So we drove towards, at the time, reducing emission levels way below where we've set as a benchmark now in this revised NDC at 64%. Many of the targets were then vague. In fact, targets set in the transport sector, for example, were not clearly articulated. We did not have an implementation plan in 2015. We did not have a measurement, reporting and verification system. We did not have a financial strategy carved. We did not have a cost attached to how we would roll out the implementation of the NDC.
So the plan was not exhaustive.
It was not exhaustive.
Then who was responsible for that?
Because countries under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change own thought about countries revising their nationally determined contribution after 5 years.
Okay.
So we had all countries now who are parties to the UNFCCC had to come back to the drawing board, look at what they had articulated in their initial NDCs, revise the NDCs to reflect the current realities at hand. So in our revision process, we took into consideration stakeholder involvement and stakeholder engagement. So we brought together a cross-section of representation across the 15 political subdivisions of this country, inclusive of policymakers, local government officials, youth, women, civil society, people living with disabilities, students, and a cross-section of individuals. During the revision process. So that was not done in 2015, but we saw it as expedient that we have a cross-representation of individuals to be a part and parcel of this process in terms of the revision, so that we articulate what are the will and decisions of the people of Liberia.
So it means that since the plan was launched initially, we haven't done nothing at all in trying to make the sort of interventions we should have made as a country.
The country is making some major strides across several sectors. The targets set out in the energy sector, some of which are already being implemented, like the interventions by the CLSG, the Cote d'Ivoire, Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea corridor electrification. Those are all some of the interventions that the government is making. In fact, the rehabilitation of the McCoffey hydro plant and the gradual distribution of current across the country. These are some of the interventions. In the transport sector, for example.
As contained in the plan.
Yes, as contained in the plan. The transport sector, for example, moving from issues related to the manual system of trying to get a database, we now graduate into an automated system. These are some of the interventions because we intend, as part of targets set out in the transport sector, to have a digitalized system, to have a system where we can be able to have a database on vehicles that we import into the country, their fuel type, the mode, the gasoline, the kind of fuel that they take in those vehicles, and how do we introduce as well labeling system, so that the labeling system can be able to gradually discourage individuals importing vehicles of older ages, and so that we reduce on greenhouse gas emission levels in the country. So some of those
we haven't done that yet.
We are gradually, as a country, gradually moving towards that. But what the revised NDC has sought to achieve is to clearly articulate interventions that we must make across priority sectors, so that we can be able to meet our target at 64% in reducing greenhouse gas emission levels. And other countries have also set benchmarks. So what we've set as a country as targets and measures to be able to reduce greenhouse gas emission levels is something that cuts across different sectors. This is why sectorial coordination in this process is kind of cardinal and key. That is why today's event is going to bring a cross-section of sectors and stakeholders from across different landscapes to be able to look at how we can jointly and concertedly move together towards implementation of the NDC implementation plan.
So you set 64%, right?
Yes.
Okay. In trying to reduce the greenhouse level, right?
Yes.
Now, if that is achieved, how does it affect our people in rural Liberia?
The impacts, as my colleague said, of climate change is quite visible. In fact, 9 of the 15 counties of Liberia lie across the coast. We're now facing a severe impact of coastal erosion. we're now also facing the brunt of heat wave. We're now facing the brunt of pollution. We're now facing devastating consequences as a result of climate change. Making frantic efforts as a country, especially a least developed country like Liberia, will prove to the rest of the world that what we've articulated in our climate change action plan is something that we are assiduously working towards in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emission levels. So what, by extension, that will do in terms of us reducing our greenhouse gas emission level by what we've set out as a benchmark in our climate change action plan is going to demonstrate the level of commitment, and it's also going to demonstrate how serious the country is to jointly consolidate efforts with the rest of the global world and the Committee of Nations in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emission levels.
I did ask the question because our people were in rural Liberia. Many of them are involved with farming activities, and I heard your colleague talking initially about how sometimes when you try to burn the farms and what goes up there. So I was asking whether you're going to put some restrictions if you are doing the implementation. Whether there'll be some restrictions on our people in rural Liberia.
We more like at the EPA, we are involved into public education and awareness, which is quite cardinal. So we are going to also utilize to a large extent elements of inclusively engaging local communities so that they get to understand. We've done it before. We continue to do it because it lies within our purview as the government institution responsible for the sustainable management of the environment.
Okay.
And we are not leaving behind issues related to public awareness and education.
Okay.
So it's not going to be like a quick fix kind of intervention, but we're going to consolidate efforts with local communities, work with different sectoral line ministries and agencies, so that this way we can collaboratively move together in terms of ensuring that the message filters down to local communities across the 15 political subdivisions of the country.
Okay, now let me go to Mr. Kane, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you are the coordinator of this whole NDC that we're talking about, and I know to get it into full swing, you've already put a cost to that, which is over 4 million. 4 million, right?
490,
okay.
490 million.
490 million. A lot of monies. And I heard from your colleague in trying to gather that money, it's part of it is conditional and part of it is not conditional. Now, how do you intend now serving as coordinator, and if the project dies, you take responsibility. If it succeeds, the credit also comes to you. So how do you intend serving as coordinator, making sure that your donor or your partners cooperate in making sure that the project or the plan is fully implemented?
Thank you, Sorbor. I think your question actually took me back to what my colleague tried to address when he said the INDC, what it did achieve, implementation. So he have said everything, but just one point I want to make clear, and then to answer the question you just raised. So if you look at the first NDC that we submitted in 2015, you will notice that it was 100% donor dependent.
Okay.
And so coming to 2020, when we updated that NDC, you will notice now that we have both government commitment and then seeking commitment from our international partners. And so how we're going to raise the funding, already, as I have said to you, we have developed the NDC implementation plan for which we are going to launch today. And I tell you, all of our partners, the people who have been supporting Liberia Development Drive, they are all invited today to be there. And then in 2015, because we didn't achieve the implementation of the NDC, later on there was one group that came up called the NDC Partnership. And so it's a coalition of nations that came out and said, in 2015, we didn't implement the NDCs that we submitted to the UNFCCC. So what can we do? So they set up, a funding mechanism where support could be channeled to different countries in implementing their NDC. So in 2018, we submitted 14 requests to that particular partnership. And today we were able to update and revise our NDC, the first NDC, and now through that mechanism we are seeking, international support when it comes to implementing our NDC. Already, the implementation plan that we are going to launch is on the website of that NDC partnership.
Okay.
As we speak, we have somebody from the NDC partnership in country, and today doing the special remarks, we're going to have the global director of the NDC partnership speaking to Liberia, also helping the government to call on other donors and partners to support the government of Liberia to raise that 490 million that we need dearly to reduce our greenhouse gas emission by 64%.
Okay. Now, does the government have a commitment there? A commitment of how much from the 490 million?
Yes, so of course, the government is divided into two. So the government has 15% commitment of that 490 million, and then international support, we have 85% coming from international support. So the support is coming both in cash and in kind.
Okay.
So if you look at it, for example, in the EPA, you have technicians that are, involved with the issue of climate change. So their knowledge and expertise and the tools and that they work with every day could be used as government, commitment in implementing our NDs. Already, we have a team of technicians at the EPA that I'm working with as the NDC coordinator, that we are, driving this process when it comes to raising climate finance to implement our NDC. So already we have started doing the ball game and rolling the ball and trying to bring partners together to understand that this commitment we have made to the world, we will need their support. And so today they're going to be there. We're going to share with them the NDC implementation plan that we have condensed, into a booklet, which of course the president will handle today and launch. And so we're going to distribute those plans to the different partners that will be present today. And even at COP in Sharm el-Sheikh this year in Egypt.
Yes, we'll be talking about the preparation.
Yeah, so we're going to go to Sharm el-Sheikh as well and then launch it internationally. Okay. So the national event is happening today, and then on the 8th of November, we're also going to launch it. So that way, we're going to attract, other partners that we are not working with currently. Will be able to attract them also to come to Liberia NDC. Remember, Liberia NDC is listed among the 100 best NDC and 10 best NDC in Africa. Okay, so we have a very strong NDC, and you have other, not only donor, but you have private sector that are already engaging the government to see how they can support in terms of raising the necessary finances that we need.
You're listening to the Super Money Show, right here on the OBC 99.9 and other frequencies across Liberia. Our guests are from the Environmental Protection Agency. We have Mr. Arthur Becker's project officer at the EPA. We also have Mr. John Carney. Mr. Carney is the coordinator of the NDC. The NDC is a nationally determined contribution. Of course, we are talking about the launch, the launch of the implementation plan of the NDC. Now, give us a description before we talk about the preparations for COP 2026. How have you planned the launch? What's going to happen today?
Yes, very important question. And so the launch of the NDC implementation plan, the activities of the day include, high-level speeches. So we're going to have different institutions that supported the NDC revision process to be speaking. For example, what I told you, that the global director of the NDC partnership would be giving us a live video, coverage today to be speaking of our NDC. And then all of the different sectors that we work with, including the youth, they all will be speaking today. And then we're going to have a technical, presentation of the NDC itself, the overview of the NDC. And then we're going to talk to some of our people who, for the first time, going to be hearing about the NDC, about the implementation plan itself, and then we're also going to be talking about the NDC financing strategy in that technical presentation. And then at the end, the president will now launch officially the NDC implementation plan. And from there, we're going to have another section that will mainly focus on the capacity building when it comes to Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. And so that would be the activity of the day today. And as we speak, registration is ongoing. We have participants already going in doing registration.
Okay.
And so we expect that today is going to be a great day for Liberia.
Okay. Today going to be a great day for Liberia. Okay, now who wants to kick off, start on our next discussion, which has to do with the preparation for COP 26?
COP 27.
COP 27. Let's hear, what is the COP 27?
COP is referred to as the Conference of Parties, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. That's a major gathering of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change to negotiate particular thematic areas of focus that the UNFCCC focuses on. This is going to be the 27th session of the UNFCCC sitting.
Okay.
And parties or signatories and those who have ratified the Paris Agreement are going to gather in Sharm el-Sheikh. The actual proceedings will run between the 6th of November to the 18th of November. The government of Liberia is, as a party to the UNFCCC, is going to be a part of other parties gathering in Sharm el-Sheikh. And this year, we will be looking at what the Glasgow outcome was, because at COP26, which was held in Glasgow, Scotland, so we're going to be looking at what were the outcomes from Glasgow. How far have we gone to be able to achieve as parties, individual parties to the UNFCCC, what the Glasgow outcome was. We're also going to look at different thematic areas of focus, issues related to Article 6, the market mechanism, the non-market mechanism. We're going to look at issues related to loss and damage, adaptation. We're going to look at adaptation and resilience, science and technology, the issues related to youth, public education and awareness. We're going to look at issues related to agriculture. There's going to be a wide range of conversations. We're also going to have side events, and Liberia is hosting, hopes to host two major side events. The official launch again on the sidelines of COP27. Liberia again be launching the implementation plan of the nationally determined contributions. We also intend to elevate the conversations there at Sharm el-Sheikh on the potentials that Liberia has, especially when it comes to the forest and biodiversity core benefits that we do have as a country, as articulated in the president's high-level speech in Glasgow. He also reiterated that at COP15 in Abidjan, at the UN Convention to Combat Desertification COP. And today, again, promises to be another day where we anticipate that the president, again, will elevate the conversations in trying to tell the world how Liberia is very, very, very important, especially when it comes to the forest potentials of our country, the biodiversity benefits that we have as a people in the country. So these are going to be some of the articulations at COP. The delegation, again, we expect that the president is going to be at Sharm el-Sheikh, but we're going to have a preparatory meeting here in Monrovia. It comes up on the 21st to prepare the delegation for Sharm el-Sheikh. We're going to provide them logistical details on what it entails in acquiring visas, what the conversations are going to be like, how the negotiations will be, how they're going to learn about basic methodologies and techniques in negotiations, climate change negotiations. So this is basically the focus of the preparatory meeting and the outlook of how COP27 is going to look like in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt.
Now, so are we prepared to get our delegation to go to the conference?
Yes, the EPA, as always, has been magnanimous to send out a clearing call to sectoral line ministries and agencies to have on board technical staff, policy makers to join us. We already getting very fruitful results from line ministries and agencies on joining us to participate in these deliberations. we expect again to have a very, very crack team at Sharm el-Sheikh, both technicians and policymakers, to elevate Liberia's conversation and ensure that we get the very benefits that we intend to accrue from all of these conversations in terms of the climate change interventions that we hope for as a country and a people.
Normally, when we announce that we have let kind of answer this one, that we have a major international conference. The expectation of our people can be very high. People expect that when the government sends a delegation, there'll be some returns. So what can we say to our people, Kanye?
Yes, so thank you very much. Yes, so some of the meetings we go to attend in relation to climate change and then talking about national development. So today, climate change is happening. And then if you look at a funding window when it comes to donors, it's shrinking.
Okay.
And so some of these negotiations can be about climate change and as well as looking at national development drive. And so in the process of, for example, we're talking about capacity building. Over the years, you will hear people telling us in Liberia that we don't have the capacity to do X, Y, and Z. But then if we don't involve the academic institution, for example, like the University of Liberia, like UMU, like AME, into this climate change negotiation, process, how will we get national capacity? So these are some of the results that we get if we send out, people to go to this negotiation, because we are going to meet with different funding agency. For example, the Green Climate Fund, they will always be at COP to see what countries will be presenting. So if you don't have people who will go and make the case for Liberia, for example, you will not have $17 million today that we are using to do the intervention at West Point.
Okay.
For example, you will not have $8 million today that we are working with the Ministry of Agriculture, to make some intervention in the agriculture sector. For example, you will not get $10 million or $11 million to carry out intervention in Sino Greenfield County. Greenfield City. So that's what those are the results that we get when we send out people to go and negotiate. So the team is made up out of two. You have the policymakers who are there at the high level to meet with other government counterparts, to talk about our development drive and talk about what climate change is doing to us here. And then the technicians are also there to follow those technical issues, the debates about whether we should focus on mitigation, support, put more money into mitigation or adaptation, or even loss and damage. So you have the technician who understand all of these technical details are there, following up on technical issue and then advising the policymaker on what decision they should take when they go to these agreements. If you notice, for example, where you have articles of the UN framework coming up, it based on decision that countries take. So our country is part of the African group of negotiators. So we don't go as a standalone country, but we go on the basis of forming alliances with different blocs. So we have the AGN, we also have the West African Alliance that we also work with. So our people have to go there and then be able to meet with different funding agencies to be able to get the necessary climate finance that we need to do some intervention. If you look at our NDC, for example, it's not just about greenhouse gas, reducing greenhouse gas emission, but it's also about supporting national development processes.
Okay.
So, for example, if you make intervention, talking about roads in Liberia, how do we raise money to build our roads? And climate change is impacting even the road. Now to go to Greenville, Sando County, it is difficult, especially during the rainy season.
Sure.
So if we can make the case to say, the rain because of climate change is causing, transportation issue in Liberia, how do we make that case?
Okay.
You need technician, you need policy.
From the transport sector.
Yeah, from the transport sector, that will be part of the team to COP, that will now make the case for Liberia and say, before we never used to have this amount of rainfall in the country, and now the data is reading, huge amount of rainfall in the country, and this is caused by climate change, and it's impacting our transport system.
Surely.
And so you are able to attract, some funding from that process. So that's why those are the benefits, the dividend that we get when we send people out to go to different negotiations.
Now, Mr. Baker, what is the Article 6?
Article 6 basically looks at market and non-market mechanisms.
Okay.
You know, we have a bigger chunk of the Upper Guinea forest. We hold the bigger chunk of the Upper Guinea forest, almost approximately 43%. And what, in essence, Article 6 looks at, especially from the market mechanism standpoint, is the ability for countries to be able to accrue benefits in terms of carbon.
Okay.
We are a we are a country that possess, as I said initially, a bigger chunk of the Upper Guinea forest. And as a result, we are a carbon sink. Most of what industrialized countries put out as CO2 or CO2 emissions, we are able to absorb
We
all
bear the
of that.
brunt of it.
Definitely. We are able to absorb that. So because we are able to absorb that, we are to a large extent able to get co-benefits from what we possess as a country.
Okay.
So the training that we're going to have the next 2 days beyond today is going to basically look at Liberia's preparedness, how our readiness, our preparedness towards moving in the direction of carbon trading. So these are some of the conversations we're going to be having. We've had these conversations on the sidelines of previous conference of parties of the UNFCCC, but we want to train national technicians at the national level who can understand issues that border around Article 6, our readiness for carbon trading, our preparedness around the relevant issues across Article 6, and how can we be able to benefit as a country from these benefits that definitely can be accrued.
So where are the trainees coming from?
The trainees are from line ministries and agencies, sectoral line ministries and agencies. We also anticipate to bring students from the Louis Arthur Graham School of Law, because issues related to Article 6 have some legal ramifications.
Okay.
We expect to also have students from the environmental science colleges, departments across tertiary institutions